As a developer, I don't always have the intuition to figure out what is a good looking design. This is why I created this rulebook, Enhance UI, which is the fundamental rules you should follow as a developer to make good looking websites. Today we have a submission from Danny. He's got a quick introduction, so let's check that out.
Adrian, thank you so much for doing this. I'm Danny Thompson. I'm D Thompson Dev everywhere on social media. The Commit Your Code community is a community of developers supporting other developers. And so I had this idea where I said, I want to make a website that has learning resources that showcases projects from developers inside the community. And I wanted it not to be my website or their website. What I wanted is a website made by the community for the community. Make it into a bunch of small tasks, keep it only in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript so beginners can jump on and help out and do a little piece of this website here and a little piece there and make this an entire community project. Will this make the entire creation of the website a lot longer? Probably, but it's a great way for us all to come together and do something amazing. So if you ever want to keep posted with that, join the Commit Your Code community, and you can check me out on my YouTube channel, D Thompson Dev.
Thanks Danny for those words. I've got a link in the description below if you guys want to check out his channel as well as his community. Otherwise, let's take a look at his design to see what we can do. But before we get started, make sure you guys hit like and subscribe, and let's just jump straight into it. Let's start by taking a look at the header. What I'm going to do is give it a little bit more space. I'm going to move everything down just a bit. And for the header, usually it can be somewhere between 60 to 120 pixels. In this case, what I might do is give it 120 pixels in general, because we do want to fit in quite a little bit here in the header. So I'm just going to expand it out here with a gray box, just so that we know where it is. For this, I'm also going to give it slightly a gray color. So maybe something like F1, F1, F1. This way we know where the header is. We're going for a green tint for this website. So sometimes what you want to do to make a header stand out a little bit more is to apply a little bit of a border at the very top of it. So we can utilize this green that we already have. This green is also a little bit too saturated. So to remove some of that saturation, I'm going to pull in some gray. So I'm just going to pull it into about here in terms of the RGB selector. Now we've got a nice green here at the top. The only other thing we can do now is clean up the menu here. So one thing that I would normally recommend is to follow the hierarchy of how most websites are done. So this is where either the logo is in the middle or on the left. This is the logo we're currently using, which is Commit Your Code. So I'm just going to place it here at the left. I'm also going to make it a little bit more bold so that we know that it's the main item, but I'm going to shrink it down just a tad to maybe 24 pixels. We'll place this right here in the center. We might add an icon in for it a little bit later on, but for the time being, we'll keep it just as is. The next thing we'll want to do is create the menu. Now for our menu, there's a few different ways we could do this. We could just place them hovering here on the top right, but alternatively, we could do a tab bar. So I'm thinking we might do that simply so that it stands out a little bit more. So for this tab bar, I'm going to make a slightly darker shade of the color. Maybe something like maybe E1, E1, E1. This is just a slight gray, and we can place all our icons in here for the logos. We can place all our menu items in here. And for our menu items, we can make them a little bit smaller again, maybe something like 20 pixels. And I might also make them a slightly lighter amount of, actually no, this font weight does seem like it's just enough. So that's fine. So we'll just make them all 20 pixels in size. Now, the other thing here that you'd probably want to do is also make sure that the active item stands out. Now, we can do this in a number of ways. One way is to change it to the primary color. But this primary color doesn't have a dark shade. Its contrast here against the menu isn't strong enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a little bit darker by putting a bit of shade into it. So we'll make it darker here, and we'll also make it a little bit more bold. Now that we've done this, the other thing we can do is make this tab bar here have a different color for the active state. So I'm going to make another one here, and for this one I'm going to make it a white color. So here we can see that it's got an active version and a passive version. We also want to make sure that each one has about the same amount of space between each one. So normally a good rule for spacing is to make sure that there's enough padding here at the top if you are to copy the text, as well as here on the bottom. For the left and right sides, you usually want to have enough for about 2 lots of letters. So that's about the right amount of space here, and you can use these letters to check more or less. This is about 1 EM versus maybe 1.5 EM. Now that we've got our menu done, we can later add in more items here, but we just have the 3 for the time being. If you really want this to stand out though, you can also put in another border here at the very top using the primary color, and this will just make it pop out just that tiny little bit more. Now that we've done this, we could use a more passive version for the other items, so maybe something like a gray. There we go, and that's looking pretty good already. So what we've got now is we've got our menu and we've got our logo here. For our logo, I'm not too sure yet about this. I feel like it needs some sort of an icon or something like that, but that can obviously be added in later. So what I'll do for the time being is I'll just do a placeholder here for where the logo might go in the future. And we'll have the text come in straight after that. So that gives it some nice definition there. We'll center this all, and I think that's okay so far. The only other thing here that is usually very useful to have in a menu is a strong call to action. Now, for a call to action in this case, it's join the community. So I'm going to create one more button here. And this one I'm going to use as the active color, which is currently our green here. For this color, we want to maybe add some white text behind it so it stands out. So I'm just going to copy this project's text. I'm just going to place it up here. For this project's test, I'm going to do join the community. And this button will probably take you either to the Discord channel or maybe to a newsletter sign up. I'm not quite sure yet, but it's just an action item where we can force people to sort of have a call to action there in the menu. It also needs a bit more accessibility. So this means that we have to make it a little bit darker. So we'll give it a bit of shade here until that white text pops out. So this is working pretty good. We'll also give it less padding here on the left and the right sides, just so that it's consistent with the menu that we had previously. And we'll place this here on the right. So now that we've got most of these objects done now, we can move on to the next section, which is our banner here. So let's take a look at that. So I'll leave that as is. Actually, no, I do think that we can move this item just down a little bit here so it almost sits off our menu, and that way it's sort of a little bit more consistent with the rest of the design. Now, in terms of our logo here, I'd also like to give it a bit of text, so I'm just going to type in logo here and give it an opacity of maybe say 33% and just overlay it here. That can be filled out later once they do have a logo. And finally, for the text over here, sometimes Roboto isn't the best for logos because it does take up quite a lot of space. So sometimes it's also good to figure out a different font to use. Let's see what options we have here. This one here looks pretty cool, looks almost like a coding font. And this is just my recommendation, is to find a nice font for your design. Right now I can't think of one off the top of my head, so we'll just leave that for later as well. So with these things done now, let's take a look at this banner design here. We've got this green tint that you can see behind it, and that's giving it a nice effect there for programmers. We've got this message here, but it's also aligned here on the right. The first thing that I would recommend with any banner, when you have a banner, is to have everything either center aligned or aligned to the left. This is just because this is the natural way people read a page. They usually read it by heading down from the logo, down to the center, and then to the right. So having it here on the right will actually make it a little bit more difficult for people to read this. So what we might do is we might actually move this image just up a little bit. We might also make it a little bit smaller. So I'm gonna reduce the size here to maybe 640 pixels. And then after that, what we're gonna do is we're going to move this title here, and we'll move it all to the left and align it to the left. This should look a little bit better now because it's flowing in straight after our logo. The next thing we want to do is have a look at this text. Right now this is railway, extra bold, but it's taking up a majority of the page, and it doesn't have almost enough contrast there. I think there is a little bit of drop shadow, but it might not be enough. Now, to keep things consistent, I would only recommend usually using 2 fonts. I'm going to change this to Roboto because we're already using Roboto for most of the design, and it's usually good to keep the same fonts throughout. So let's move that to Roboto. The other thing we can do here is we can actually capitalize this. So join the community might look better in full caps. Since we've got a capitalized version now, we could also reduce the size a little bit. I'm going to do 64 pixels here. Since we've got a little bit less room for the banner, we've made it a little bit less in terms of height. And for the drop shadow, I'm actually going to increase it. I'm going to add the blur to maybe 15, and I'll turn off the y-axis and make it a maybe 33% opacity. So it's got more contrast, but we can notice the blur a little bit less. Now with this subtext, this developers supporting other developers, let's actually do this in lowercase. So developers supporting other developers will now be the lowercase version. So the main title here is uppercase, the second one is lowercase, and we'll also reduce the font size here to maybe 36 pixels, so it's in line with the text. We'll also apply the same sort of a shadow effect to this one. So 15 pixels at 33%, just so that it stands out once more. This one's also still a little bit hard to read, so I'm going to make it a little bit more bold. And this one here, we might increase it just a tad. So we've got letter spacing here. Now, when we do letter spacing for large text, normally I would recommend removing a few percent. This will allow it to be a little bit larger while still being readable, because once we get to really large sizes, sometimes the text actually has too much spacing between the letters, and it's kind of hard to read in general. So let's place that back in here. And that's looking pretty good now. So we've got join the community and developers supporting other developers all in one line. This second line here, we could tint this with a color. So right now it is a white. So let's see how it looks like with a different color. Maybe a slight yellow or a slight tint here with the green. So I think that looks pretty good so far. Let's actually move this a little bit closer together. And for this text, we could also maybe place it on 2 lines. So let's give this a shot. We could have one that says join there, which can be a little bit smaller. And the second piece of text can be community, which is the main thing that we're trying to do here. It's to create a community. So I'm going to do this maybe at 124 pixels. It's about the same width as the community section here with the text below it. So we'll have join there, and maybe we'll make this one just a tad bit smaller. So what I'm thinking is, let's see, we're on 72 pixels. Let's make it 66, maybe say 62. That looks good. So I'll have join the community, and here it'll say developers supporting other developers. So that's pretty good now. And I'm happy with this part here. The next one we can look at is the button itself. It says join now. It's a pretty good button. There's a few things we can do to make it better though. What we can do for this button is, first we can possibly remove the borders. I would almost recommend never having borders these days for logos, so I'm gonna remove that. Then the box shadow, at this point I don't think we need it for the button, so I'm gonna remove that too. Now we've tried this button here with green, and we've got a green that we're already using which has a bit more contrast. So I'm going to apply that one with that color to see how that looks. Currently when we see that, it sort of has a very bland look to it. It almost doesn't stand out. It blends into the background. So we can try a white color. When we do white, we're going to have to change the text to have a different color. And that's standing out a little bit better, but it's almost difficult to tell that that is a button. So the other thing we can do here is let's copy over this text from home. And for this text, let's do, what was the text before? I didn't even read it. Join now. Okay, let's put in join now. And we'll make this text just a little bit bigger as well. 36 pixels, I'd say. Maybe 34 pixels. Let's do that. 34 pixels. So we'll do that. And we'll keep the font Oh, sorry, we'll keep the button consistent with the buttons here we have at the top. So I'm almost thinking that we could copy this button that we had and place it in below. So let's copy this button so that we've got a consistent design aesthetic between our buttons, and call this join now. We'll place it here and we'll give it more space between the left and the right. We'll give it a little bit more height, and we'll make this text a little bit bigger, maybe 24 pixels. And there we go, there's our button. So that's okay. I still think that this button doesn't look good in white, so I'm gonna give it a fill of that border top, but for the border top, instead, I'm gonna give this a color of white. So it's still that same aesthetic, it's just reversed. We'll make the text white now, and I think that's okay. That's actually getting a little bit better. I still think we need to play around with the colors just a little bit, so we have a bit more, I suppose, what is it, accessibility, so things stand out. So one thing we can do is we can saturate it more, but then the text doesn't look as good, or we can add a little bit more shade. The problem is that when we do this, you can see it's blending into the background. That's sort of the problem that we're having here. So it's very difficult for this one in this case. Let's see what we can consider doing to make this a little bit better. I think we might go back to the lighter, more saturated version. We might even make it the same color here as our description text. And we'll just give it a little bit more saturation by pulling it up a little bit here, and then making the text here a nice black or maybe a dark version of that shade. We'll remove the top section here and any other shadows. And what we can do now is this rectangle where we're applying this shade, we'll increase that to maybe 66%. So what this is doing now is it's making our text stand out, it's making our button stand out, and it's making this join now section stand out too. So far I think I'm happy enough with that. We'll just keep making this a little bit lighter until it looks good. It's almost as if it's white, I think it's looking the best right now. So let's change this here to have our other color of green. And I think that's more or less this section done. Let's make sure this is all aligned here right in the center, and let's move the button here just about 2 EM from the text. We've got a nice strong join the community aspect here. So this header is more or less done, I'd say now. What's next will be, I suppose, doing the next section of this website. So we could expand this out and create a second part to this website where we create an About Us section. Now I've got a little bit of text that I had got written by Danny earlier for the About Us section. So let's use that. It's this one over here, which is giving us a bit more information. Now, whenever you're adding text to a website, you want to make sure that it's spaced out nicely so that it's not overwhelming. There's not too much to read. So I'm giving it a few breaks here. The other thing I want to do is maybe almost separate this out into 2 sections. So this will be our first section, and then we can create another section over here to our left, which will have the next bit of text. Now, since we've started with the alignment here on the left, our first feature bit of text can be here on the right, and our second can be here on the left once more. Normally we want to follow a grid structure, so you want to keep everything more or less aligned the same as you're using. We haven't set up any grids yet for this design, but this should be enough. And the other thing is that whenever you're creating a section or a block like this one over here, you want to give it at least about 100 pixels from the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go down 100 pixels. And then over here, I'm going to go down 200 pixels. So this will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and do that once more. So this looks good. And now that we've got these sections done, we can add some images here on the left and the right. So I'm going to make this text just a little bit smaller and expand it out. And then here we can have an image. We'll move this down, and here we can add another image. That way, as we're reading down the code, it's got a little bit more information. So I think that's pretty good. And the only other thing now this is missing is a nice title. So here, let's go about us. Let's make this a little bit bigger. So I'm going to make it maybe say 48 pixels, and I'm going to make it a little bit bolder. Then when we have a header section, which say is the color black, the text should have the slightest bit of opacity. So we could do maybe say 85%, just so that we know that's secondary text, or we can make this a shade of hex 202020, which is just a lighter shade of black. This way we start off with the header reading that, and then we go on to the text. Let's give this all a little bit more room. So I'm just going to move it down 100 pixels between each, and let's do the same here. So that I'll move over here, about us, what we do, and here we can place some images. Now I don't have any additional images yet, but we can add some in later on, so that's fine. So let's go image 1. We'll expand this out a little bit. Let's scale it. So where's the scale tool? Over here somewhere. Scale, image 1, and this can be image 2. Beautiful. And this can keep going down the page more or less as we have more sections. So now we've got a nice introduction. We've got our first section. For this first section, the only other thing here is that this font is just a tiny bit too big. For paragraph text, I would normally use a font of maybe 18 or 20 pixels these days, because a lot of people do have bigger screens. So you have to take that into consideration. We can center all of this and just apply this same sort of size to everything else. Let's move this down just a little bit too. Great, so that's okay so far. Let's see if we can grab some images that we can use here. So one place that's good for images is Unsplash. So let's go to Unsplash and type in programming and see what we get when we spell it correctly. Just going to place it in here. And this image is fine, so I'm just going to download this one. And maybe one more here once I find it. This one here should be okay for the time being. But we do want to get community in here, so let's go community. Programming. Let's see if anything comes up. No, that doesn't look like programming at all. That's much better. So here's a good picture. Let's get this one. And then maybe one more. Let's see what we have here. Yeah, maybe this one here. So let's download that one. So I've got a few good images here. I'm going to drag this one into Figma. And we're going to resize it, because right now it looks like it's larger than life. And we'll place this in just over here for our image. And we'll also give it a bit of a mask. So our image is, I think, which rectangle is that? That's this one here. So I'm going to select both, and I'm going to select here to use as mask. And we can place the image in here and get rid of this placeholder text. Then for our second image, let's grab this image that we created or added. And let's place that in here below. And we'll grab this box as well, and we'll create a mask for those two. Great. So that's looking good so far. So good. And now it's got a little bit more extra life. The only other thing that I would say is that we could add the tint that we're applying here to our header to the images as well. And that way they can be a little bit more consistent with the design aesthetic that we're going for here. So for this image here, we could use, say, a blue color, because I know that blue is a color that we use always in our code editor when we've got, functions and stuff. And I know that there's a pinky red that we have as well. So here's another good color. And this is just giving the website a little bit more life, a little bit more color aesthetic, and just making it a little bit more interesting when we're reading through. It doesn't take away from the text, because that's the main part. We just wanted to sort of give it some context, really. If we wanted to improve this a little bit more, we could add extra layers on top. So for example, this image here, we can expand out maybe a box here that might be, say, a linear gradient. And this one here, I'm going to apply from the right side of this box to the left side at about a negative 90-degree angle. or whatever, no, 0-degree angle, whatever angle that is. Let's apply this in, and when we do this, we can see that we've got this nice sort of a fade into the image, and that looks pretty good. The only other aspect to this is that we want to keep it consistent. So if we create one here, we need to create one over here as well. But now we've got a little bit more room here for our text, which has a little bit more priority as well. And I'm pretty happy with that so far. The only problem is that it doesn't look consistent with how we've done the header of the design. So in this case, I'm going to remove it, but it's just something that you can play around with to see what works and what doesn't work. The next aspect to this, I would say, is to create some call to actions for each one of our sections. So here where we have, say, join now, I'm going to create another button here, and I'm going to use this one that we used in our header. I'm going to place it here below our section here for the About Us. And this, I will say, maybe join the Discord. Now, the color for Discord is like a purpley color, I think. I'm going to use that for this button. I'm going to see if I can pull in the Discord icon as well. So let's go to Font Awesome. And let's head over to type in Discord. I'm sure we'll have a nice icon we can utilize for that. So that's just one here. So this is a quick way you can make your designs a little bit more interesting. I'm going to copy over this SVG and resize it. Yep, there we go. And we'll also make this a white color, and we'll overlay it here on the button, just so that people who see this button, they'll immediately know that if they select this, they'll be joining the Discord server. So that looks good. Let's move the text up just a little bit so that the button has a little bit more room here in this section. So that's nice. The next thing we can do is maybe if there was a newsletter or something like that, we could do that for the next section. So let's grab all of these and see as well. The other aspect to this is it blends in with this image too, because the blue and the purple are almost the same color. So let's copy this over, and this time let's select maybe a different aesthetic. Maybe let's follow this aesthetic of the red, and this could be sign up for the newsletter. Now I'm not sure if there's a newsletter yet, but we can get an envelope icon here, and we can use that as the button icon. So let's grab maybe this one over here, and I'm just going to download this one over here and drag it into our design. Set the color to be white, resize it, and move it to where we had Discord before. So that looks just about right. Now for the icon size, I usually like to have it about the same size as the text, or maybe about 1.25 times larger. That usually seems to work out quite well. Let's move all of these across. And with these sections done, we can move on to our next section, which might be the footer, or moving towards the end of this design more or less. So for that, I'm going to copy over this green aesthetic that we have, and maybe use a darker version of it. So right now it does have a bit of opacity to it. So what I'll do is I'll just remove the opacity, and maybe also give it a little bit of gray, maybe moving it here to the bottom, or maybe even, yeah, all the way down here. So that's a little bit better. I still think that green doesn't look very good, so I might just use a gray, and we'll have a little bit of a bottom section here that might be, say, black even. And this will be for the copyright. It'll just be a darker version. And we've lost our, have we lost our newsletter? Where'd our newsletter go? It's very strange. It's all the way down here somehow. Let's copy that back in, and let's size this up and put that right into our button over there. So that's great. So for the footer, there's a few things we could do. Now for the footer, honestly, I would normally start off with a copy of what the organization is. So maybe let's type in here, what was it? The commit your code. So commit your code. Now this would normally have the logo in there too, but since we don't have the logo, we might have to get that placeholder once more and put this down here. And finally, the text here might just have some more information about it in a slightly smaller size. So let's do that as 85% opacity. And I'll place that in here like this. So this will just be a little bit more information. We can fill this in a little bit later, but let's give this about 100 pixels here from the top. And we don't need as much information here, but what we do need is some contact information. So this might be something like the commit@yourcode.com, email address, maybe a phone number, or maybe a channel to check out. So youtube.com/commit-your-code. And what else could we put in here? If there was, say, the Discord community, so Discord community. So those are 3 nice links that we can utilize. Let's put those just in here like that. Let's make this just a tad bit smaller and move everything up a little bit here. So with that done, the other thing we can do here is add maybe an icon for each. So for the icon for email, maybe an icon here for the Discord community. Let's move that up in our layers. And maybe an icon here for YouTube as well. So let's type in YouTube on here. We should get a nice icon we can use. So I'm just going to use this one over here. We'll download that as an SVG and drag that in. I'm just going to resize it and move it in here and make sure that it's also about the same size as our other icons, because right now it's a tiny little thing and that's way too small. There we go. So with that done now, what we can do is also maybe have a contact form. It's always good in case people don't feel comfortable emailing, or if they just quickly want to send off a message and they don't have time to open up their email. So let's copy over this piece of text here and type in send us a message. Do you have any questions? Let's put that in over here. And in this case, for a contact form, it just needs a couple of inputs. So I'm gonna copy these boxes over here, and instead of having them as buttons, they're now going to be inputs. So let's zoom in here and select them, and let's make them white. And the text here can be, say, maybe placeholder text, about 50% opacity of a black. That's a good placeholder text. And what's happened here? All my layers have been locked for some reason. Let me just unlock those. And here, let's do your email address. Let's place that in here. Let's copy that over. Your message. We can also make this a tad bit smaller for the inputs. They don't have to be so large, but your message can be a little bit larger. So let's grab that, and let's move all of these up a little bit too. Let's select each one. There we go. And I'm going to move this up just to about here. And let's create a button to submit. So I'm going to probably use, say, this one that we had before, or maybe this one. Let's paste that in below here. Great. I might make this the primary green color. So I think we had a copy of it here. And we'll make this text now white so it stands out. And we'll give this about 50% of the width. So submit can be our text for this contact form. And the only other thing is that I want the height to be the same as the inputs. So I'm just going to update that here. And that looks more or less fine to get us started. So far, so good. For this contact form, I almost feel like it could be here on the left, and our section here can be on the right. So let's actually move that all here to the left, because that might look a little bit better. It's always good to play around with these sections just to see what works and what doesn't work. So in this case, I've got here this one on the left. We might give these sections a little bit more room in case people have larger messages. And this logo here, for example, could be placed here on the left, become a little bit bigger as well maybe. Let's actually expand it out with this description here on the left, logo, and our community links can just go down here. So that seems to fit in much nicer. And finally, last but not least, we have our copyright message. So this is the message I like to usually put at the very bottom of the website. So in this case, it'll be copyright 2020 or rights reserved, blah, blah, blah. And I'll just center that right here in the middle. Nothing too special. We could also make this a little bit smaller because it's not really that important. Just something that you want to have on most websites. Probably also want a privacy policy, terms and conditions, and maybe something about cookies, but man, I really don't like cookies, so I've seen that message pop up way too many times. But I think we're more or less done here to at least start off this design. You can start copying over some of these aesthetics, so you could create more sections in here if you wanted to, or you could just have essentially some more pages in the future too. So we might have a look at how to design those pages, but this is a very good starting point for us, and I'm pretty happy with that. Let's take a look at what we started off with and what we have now. So let's open up the visuals over here and move this one here across. So here are the two pages. What we had originally was a page sort of with a logo and a couple of menu items, but the message was almost like a one-pager. I've actually made the header a little bit smaller so that we get a bit more information about the organization. I've moved the menus in one section and the logos in one section. And for each, I've tried to add a bit of color to bring a bit of life into the design. If you're creating a website and it's only a single color, you'll know that it's always good to match it against another color as well. And that just makes it a little less bland. And this hopefully is a good example of how just a little bit of color can also make the design look great. For this next section, I'm going to time-lapse this at 10x speed. This will be sort of freestyle design, where I'm pulling in ideas just based off how I feel. This is sometimes something useful you can do to have a look at what works and what doesn't work. The very first thing I do here is make an icon for our logo, because it's not always good just to have a placeholder there. Sometimes that's not very useful because it doesn't really give you a design aesthetic of what you're after. So I pull this one out in Font Awesome and apply that in. I also adjust the text here a little bit and add a bit of a blur to our banner just so that the text in our banner stands out a little bit more too. Finally, with that done, I adjust the navigation. Since we've got more of a dark thing happening in our header, I apply those same sort of principles to the navigation as well. So that way everything stays a little bit more consistent. Now this top section looks pretty good, and we can move on to the next section. Something we didn't add in originally was any strong call to actions. So this is something I usually recommend to do after any website design, where you start off with a header and a banner. Having a strong call to action actually gets the user to do something, because after the main screen, when people land on a website, only about 30 to 50% of them stick through to scroll to the bottom. So you want to make sure that they interact straight away when they hit that page. Now for our interaction, I'm going to pull in an image from Unsplash, and I'm going to add a little bit of text to it. You can add text to the top or at the bottom, and here I'm playing around with different colors and options whether I'm going to add it to the top or the bottom. In this case, I found that at the top it didn't look quite right, so I added a bit of a background gradient to the bottom there, and it added some text to that too, and that looked pretty good. Another thing I did was I used a contrasting color just so that that section looks good, and sometimes if you can't pick out the right color, you can use a color inside of the image, and that'll help you make that gradient look a lot better. Now finally, we're going to need to pull in some other images here, because when you do add the call to actions, you want them to represent what your message is. For our next section here, we've got community projects, so obviously I wanted to have a few people in here. And for our very last one there, I wanted to have one for a Discord link where people are chatting. But unfortunately on Unsplash there doesn't seem to be any images of anyone using Discord or chat in general, so I just used this one here, which is a close approximation. I've also used the Discord color in there so that that can stand out quite nicely. I've updated some of the button styling and some of the menu just so that it looks a little bit better. And after all of that, here is our updated design. Now you'll notice that this design has come out to look a little bit similar, but a little bit different to what we originally started with. And this is what happens if you progressively work on your design to improve it bit by bit. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is what Enhanced UI is all about, trying to make the design of websites a little bit better. You don't have to be a graphics designer, but there are rules to follow to make your design look a little bit better. Things like color theory and topography and sizing, and all of these are things that I'll be going over in my book. So make sure you check out the link in the description below to find out more about it. Otherwise, check out Danny's channel. His idea for creating a community around committing code and helping a developer grow by joining a community of other developers, I think is a great thing and a great opportunity for us developers to check out. So I'll link those in the description as well. Otherwise, make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.